Assembly is one of those things that it seems no one learns nowadays, and in this video I want to talk about why I think that you should indeed learn it even if it's not popular to do so. The first reason is that it's the easiest and most fun way to learn how computers work. You've probably heard the argument that it's a way to learn how computers work, but I want to go a step further and say that it's the easiest and most fun way. Because if you try to learn the theory about how a computer works, how everything works underneath the hood, and you do stuff like reading an assembly manual, those things might teach you important concepts, but it's a boring way to do so, and as a result it's going to be much harder to learn how computers work. So while assembly is not the only way to learn how computers work, it is the easiest and most fun way, especially if you try to build an actual project, let's say something very simple like a Hello World, or you go a step further, you try to reverse engineer a program, assuming that you have the rights to do so, like an open source program, or you might want to look for bounty programs where assembly is part of it, meaning where the bounty program requires you to download a program and take a look at the source code, at the binary, and try to reverse engineer it to find a bug. If you do things this way and get your hands dirty, it means that you'll have a problem that you'll encounter, and then the only way out of it is going to be to better understand how assembly works so that you can get over that obstacle, let's say. At the most basic level, if you want to be able to print a hello world to the terminal, you'll need to first of all know how to define a string, how to access those bytes in memory, and then how to tell the OS to print that string. And at each step of the way, you're going to learn very important concepts related to assembly, which as a result will mean that you'll know much better how computers actually work. But before we continue this video, I want to invite you to join the waiting list and maybe even the pre-sale of a new learning platform that I'm building, which is going to be the new face of WebDevFuel. Now, if you're not aware, this channel TechWith2 started as WebDevFuel, and my goal for this learning platform is for it to be very easy to use and allow you to learn very complex topics without having to set up everything from scratch, while allowing you to still, again, learn a lot of cool things. A lot of programming courses make you install things, set up things locally, which is very confusing, especially if you're just getting started with a new technology or even with programming itself. But this learning platform will have no local installation necessary, and the entirety of the projects that we'll build within a particular course will include the client, the server, the databases, the dependencies. You'll get access to all of these with a unique URL that only you have access to. And if you prefer to use your local editor like VS Code, Cursor, NeoVim, you can do that. But if you prefer to not have to install anything locally, you can also use the web editor. And this will be the case for any kind of course or learning path, whether that is a full stack web development project or even lower level stuff like ARM, C, Odin, and other kinds of things that are different than web development. So if you want to join the waiting list, and again, maybe even the pre-sale, go to webdevfuel.com, where we're going to be able to submit your email address to be notified when this launches. And if you want to support the project, like I said, you'll be able to buy a 1-year plan to this new learning platform at a discounted price. This means that when we launch this new learning platform, you'll have from that very day that we launch 1 entire year of access at a very discounted price, because again, this is supposed to be a pre-sale since this new learning platform is not yet available to the public. And as a bonus, you'll also have direct input into all of the features and the development of it if you choose so. So if you decide that you also want to give a hand when it comes to feedback before we do the initial public launch, you'll also be able to do so. And if in the past you bought the HTMX and GoSASS blueprint, you'll also have 1 entire year of access completely for free. You don't even have to join the pre-sale at all. So if that's the case, just keep an eye on your inbox that you use to join the HTMX and GoSASS blueprint, and you'll get completely for free just because you bought that course in the past, basically as a bonus for having done so. So again, to join the waiting list, and if you choose so also the pre-sale, go to webdevfuel.com. Second, debugging will become a breeze. You don't have to necessarily drop into assembly for this to be true, but the fact that you'll be able to read the code in languages like C, Odin, Zig, or even languages that manage the memory for you like Go, and then be able to imagine how that might translate into assembly is more than enough for you to be much better at debugging a program that you're writing. And of course, you always have the option of compiling your program and then seeing how that translates into assembly. In a lot of cases, languages make a lot of decisions for you when it comes to compiling to the actual assembly or machine code. And if you're not aware of what those decisions might be, or let's say that those decisions are simply not well documented, you'll be very confused about certain outcomes of your program when you write it. You'll expect expect a certain behavior, but it's not actually happening the way that you expected it to. And knowing how to at least read assembly means that you'll be able to understand how that code is translating into machine code and get to a point where you know exactly where the bug is coming from much faster. Then performance, also the same thing. It becomes much easier to write performant programs. And for example, if you find parts of your program that are slow, it's very easy again to do what we just talked in the case of debugging. You go to the assembly code and you see exactly why things might be slower than you expected it to. Sometimes that might be simply because of a mistake that you did in your code, and in other times you might simply have certain kinds of assumptions that you're making when it comes to how the code is going to be compiled, and you can essentially correct those assumptions by taking a look at the assembly. And the cool thing is that you won't even get to a point where you have to do this, because you'll be able to write programs that are performant in the first place with a lot more ease. Because at every step of the way, you won't just think about the logic of your program, about the business logic, but also how that might translate to machine code, or in other words, how it will perform. And the final reason is something that is more relevant to the present moment, and that is RAM is very expensive now because of artificial intelligence. And I would say that it's more important today than 5 years ago to take advantage of hardware. Obviously, if we were to talk about, let's say, the 90s or even before that, at that time computers didn't have so much memory, so I would say that at that time it was more important. And ever since then we got more and more memory inside our computers, or today our smartphones, but that is starting to shift again because of artificial intelligence. And I would say that today it's more important than in, for example, 2020 to be able to write programs that take advantage of the memory that we have available, because RAM is getting so much more expensive and people are not going to be able to afford laptops with, let's say, 32 gigs of RAM, 64, or even more than that. Especially if we're talking about everyday consumers, not people in tech, people in Silicon Valley, and so on. And obviously this means that wasting space in memory means that some users will have a bad experience. If you do not care about how your program performs, how well you're taking advantage of your memory, if you just make, let's say, quote unquote, dumb decisions where you basically don't care how much memory you're creating, if you're correctly like freeing up your memory or not, or in languages that are interpreted, just how much memory just getting created all over the place, then that means that you will create programs that to some people, a large portion of your user base is going to have like a lot of bad time using the program because you didn't care about those things. Now, this is obviously something that might change in a couple of months or a couple of years, but it is true today that RAM is now very expensive. So I would say that it's very important now to start thinking about using the memory in a thoughtful way and not wasting it.